Well, I've entitled my sermon, Nick at Night. For any of you that have cable television and children, or even if you don't have children, there's a cable channel called Nickelodeon. I think it's still around. And they advertise Nick at Night, which basically is an advertisement for old TV shows and family-oriented movies that they do at night. So I thought I'd try a little catchy title, Nick at Night, see if someone appreciated it or not. But what we have here is a very interesting encounter between Nicodemus and Jesus, found only in the Gospel of John. Now, the Gospel of John is a very unique gospel. I've told you this before, but we're going to do a little Bible study, a little refresher course here right off the bat. The Gospel of John is the fourth gospel written. It's written late in the 80s, perhaps even into the early 90s AD. The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are all very similar. They have very much the same timeline as they tell the story of Jesus. They tell very similar stories with a few unique stories in each of the Gospels. They're called synoptic because they give a synopsis of Jesus' life. Now, the Gospel of John, the fourth Gospel, is different. It's written later. Its order is a little bit different, and that's okay. John has a very highly developed Christology. Now, there's a good seminary word for you, but a very highly developed understanding of who Jesus was. In fact, it's what's referred to as a high Christology. There's a great emphasis on the divinity of Jesus as opposed to the humanity of Jesus. Much more so than we find in the other three Gospels. In fact, as we read the Gospel of John, we get a little glimpse into how that understanding is extrapolated out into an early heresy in the church. Not in the Gospel of John, but after an early heresy in the church where there were a group of followers of Jesus who believed that Jesus was only divine and not human. And that was deemed a heresy in the early church. But we get glimpses of that within the Gospel of John. Now, there's some very interesting characteristics to the Gospel of John. One is that there is irony in the Gospel of John. A lot of irony is found in the Gospel of John. An example would be Nicodemus, who is a leader of the Jews, comes to Jesus and calls him Rabbi. We know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one can do the signs that you do apart from the presence of God. And yet, a little later, we understand that he has no clue about what he has just said. I mean, what does it mean to say that Jesus is a teacher who has come from God? There's some irony built into that, as well as many other places in the Gospel of John. We find in John, like we do to some degree in the Synoptics, but much more pronounced in John, where Jesus is speaking on one level, but the followers of Jesus don't understand on that level. They interpret on a more mundane level. As an example, Jesus talks about being born from above. Oftentimes we refer to it in the modern parlance, born again. And he's talking about a spiritual rebirth. But obviously Nicodemus is understanding it as a physical rebirth. How can I enter my mother's womb again, a second time? I'm old. So there's this dualism. Jesus is talking on one level, and the hearers and followers of Jesus are understanding on a more mundane level. Certainly, John is a signs gospel. There are lots of signs in the Gospel of John, lots of miracles performed by Jesus, much more so than in the Synoptics. But they are seen as signs. And yet, at the end of the Gospel of John, we hear the phrase, "Blessed are you who have seen and yet believe, yet how much more blessed are those of you who have not seen and yet believe." And there's some clues. There's some clues that the writer gives us. When things happen in the light of day, when people confess that Jesus is Lord in the light of day, these are the ones that are the true followers of Jesus, the true disciples of Jesus. If something's done at night in the Gospel of John, then it's kind of questionable. And here we have this leader of the Jews, Nicodemus, coming to Jesus when? At night, under the cover of darkness, with great curiosity, asking Jesus some very profound questions, but being very unprepared to hear what Jesus was saying in response to those questions. You must be born from above, born anew, born again. And the Spirit moves where it will. And we are, I'm interpreting now, we are invited to be open to the Spirit of God as it lays claim on our lives. We must be transformed. We must be born from above, born in the Spirit, baptized by the Spirit and by water, and not in the mundane understandings. And then, of course, the conclusion, that I think probably every person who is a person of faith learns when they're quite young. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, so that everyone who believes in Him may not perish, but may have eternal life. Now, there are a lot of sermons that can come out of these 17 verses, but I just want to say a couple of things about this encounter with Nicodemus at night and what Jesus is inviting Nicodemus to understand. That indeed, a follower of Jesus is one who confesses Jesus as Lord in the light of day, and then is open to the power of the Spirit that transforms that person, that gives them new life and new hope and new possibilities. Set free by the Spirit. The Gospel of John talks a lot, or gives us a lot of indicators about who are the true followers of Jesus and who are the ones that are the partial followers of Jesus. I'm reminded a number of years ago, before we had the leadership school at the First Christian Church in Oklahoma City the last Saturday of January, before we did that as a region, we had what we called B, Oklahoma B, big educational event. Sometimes it was a multi-day event. It was held at Central State, now the University of Central Oklahoma. For a few years, it was held at the Central Oklahoma Christian Camp once or twice. And a great response from all over the region. People would come to learn about how to be an elder and then how to teach a Sunday school class, to do this, do that, resourcing for youth ministry. There were all kinds of workshops. Well, I decided one year to go to a workshop for young adults. Now, keep in mind this was probably 25 years ago, so all of those young adults now are middle-aged, that we talked about back then. But a friend of mine who was leader of that workshop and who was minister of a fairly well-known church in the region talked about the fact that you can't use a couple of words with young adults of that day. You've heard me say this before probably, but you never want to use the word commitment. You never want to use the word commitment. Or you never want to talk about priorities, because if you do that, you're just going to run them off. Because young adults 25 years ago don't want to talk about commitment, nor do they want to talk about priorities. Well, I was taken aback by his statement in those days, and I'm really taken aback by that statement even today. But you know what? We in the faith, whether we say it or not, we still act that way. When we talk about what it means to be a true believer, a true follower of Jesus Christ, I'm reminded of what Fred Craddock says, and I've said this to you before too. But he said, we say Jesus is Lord. The words kind of roll off our tongues, but if we really thought about what we were saying, the words would get stuck in our throats. Because it means our lives have to be different. That we have to be open and seek to discern God's will for our lives. And it rearranges our priorities and it rearranges our commitments. But in the modern day, like it was 25 years ago, we don't like to talk about commitment. To be frank with you, we sell the gospel pretty cheaply in the 21st century. Oh, come on, we want you to join the church. Our numbers are dwindling. We need more people. But you don't have to come every Sunday. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do that. Just do what feels comfortable for you. Just do what kind of works into your schedule. Don't we do that? Are we true followers of Jesus, or are we partial followers of Jesus? Do we come to Jesus in the light of day,